So in today's video, I'm going to show you a fast method for painting Heliconia flowers. You can follow this with any brushes you want, but I'll list the ones I'm using in the description. So the Heliconia flower is made of these repeating segments called bracts, and we're going to start by painting one of those first. And I've got a sketch placed in here that has 4 different options, and I'm going to use this one for this video. You can download this sketch for free in the description. And to start painting, I'm going to grab the abstract round brush and a sort of deep saturated purplish red tone, and I'm going to use that to roughly fill this out. And I'm not worried about going over the edges of the sketch because we can fix it later on. Next, I'm going to select a bright yellow color to fill out the end of this bract, and then after that I'm going to use green just along the edge. And once I've got the main colors laid down like this, I'm going to change my brush to the water blender, and I'm going to use it at a medium size to soften all these edges. And after that initial rough blending, I'm going to shrink my brush size here and then go side to side to create a kind of linear blending texture. And once the blending's finished, I can grab the eraser brush, which is set to the fineliner pen, and I'm going to use that to cut everything back so it matches the sketch. Next, I'm going to move on and add some more texture to this. So for that, I'll make a blank layer above the bract. I'm going to choose pure white, and I need some kind of rough scratchy brush, so I'm going to go to the drawing tab and use the little pine. And I'm just going to use this side to side to create a line texture. And that looks pretty good, but it's too strong, so I'm going to control the effect by lowering the layer opacity. And once I'm happy with how it looks, I'll merge everything together onto one layer. Now, in a moment here, I'm going to duplicate and kind of build the flower by arranging these bracts, and that's going to mean they're going to sort of overlap. So in my experience, I think it looks better if I make the stem here a little bit darker, and then the base here a little bit lighter. That just makes them stand off more when I stack them. So to do that, I'm going to grab the freehand selection tool. I'm going to select the whole stem, feather it out, and then darken it here with the hue, saturation, and brightness. After that, I'll grab the selection tool again and do the same thing down here, but this time I'll brighten it. And with the bract finished, we can turn off the sketch and start building the flower. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to create a duplicate here. Then I'm going to use the arrow tool to move it into position, and then if I need to, I can also mirror it. And I'm just going to position it like this, just very roughly. Then I can grab the warp tool here and bend it, and this will let me bend it in a much better position so this lines up, but it's also going to let me bend the end of it so it looks more different than that one. This is just to prevent each one looking like an exact copy. And once I'm happy with how it's lining up, I'm going to grab the eraser brush and use it to cut the overlapping stem back so it kind of lines up. And you can see how this dark area meets this light area. This is the contrast issue I was mentioning a minute ago, and that's why I darkened the stem and then lightened the base. And to save time, I'm just going to fast forward and do this process 5 more times. Basically, I'm just duplicating that first bract we painted, moving it into position, warping it a little bit, and then erasing it so it lines up correctly. And you could definitely continue this process and make a much longer flower, but I think this is a good stopping point. Now, at the bottom of most of these flowers, there's a structure called a pendant, and we're going to build it out of one of these bracts as well. So just like before, I'm going to duplicate that original bract, move it into position, and I'm just going to cut it with the eraser brush, warp it a little bit, and then stack maybe 4 of them together just to create this kind of overlapping pendant. And once the pendant is finished, I recommend merging all the layers you used for it together onto one, just to keep the layers panel organized. We've also got all these other bracts on separate layers, so I think I'll merge those together as well. Just for now, keep this section here separate from the pendant. Next, I'm going to select the pendant, and then I'll kind of position it here and scale it so it fits under the flower. And then basically to finish up the structure of the flower, I need to connect the pendant and then also add the stem kind of curling around like this. And I recommend doing this just on another layer just for now. So I'll make a new layer, but I'll put it below everything. And for the brush, I'm going to use the hard edge round brush. Now I need to grab this color again, so I'm going to do a long press and try to find it. I think that looks good, but it's a little bit too saturated. I think that's good enough. And I'm just going to use this to kind of rebuild the structure of the flower. Next, I'm going to merge everything together onto one layer, and then use the water blender brush to smooth some of these transitions. And then in areas like this, where it's not perfectly smooth, I'll use the eraser brush to kind of straighten it out. And so far, this is looking really good. Now, usually with the stem up here, there'll be a kind of ombre effect. So to do that, I'm going to grab the freehand selection tool. I'm just going to select the top portion of the stem. I'll feather it out quite a bit. Then I can go to hue, saturation, and brightness. And I want to shift it towards a purple tone that's a little bit brighter and a little bit less saturated. Another important detail is on the flower itself. So each of these bracts are actually more like leaves, but you will see the flowers inside kind of poking out once in a while. So to get that effect, I'll make a blank layer, and I'm going to put it below the heliconia. For the brush, I'll use the hard edge round again, and I'm just going to paint on some lines just on a couple of these bracts. And with all the details finished, I'll merge everything together so the heliconia is on one layer, and I'm going to move on and show you how to paint the stem. So if I paint the stem just like this, it's going to be sort of parallel to the flower, which could be nice, but I want to arrange this so the stem is going behind the flower a little bit. So that means I need to bend this stem a little bit so it terminates over here. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and grab the liquify tool, set it to push. You can copy my settings down here, and I'm just going to use this to kind of move my stem over into position. And I think that's pretty good, but it did end up getting a little bit lumpy. So I'm just going to fix that by using the liquify tool at a smaller size, and then I can do tiny corrections like this. And now for the stem, I'm going to make another blank layer. I'll put it below the flower again. I want to choose a pretty dark greenish tone. If it's not perfect, I can shift the hue later on, but I think that's a good starting point. For the brush, I'm going to use the hard edge round. And I want the stem to be extremely straight, so I'm just going to draw a line like this, hold the position at the bottom, so Procreate kind of snaps it, and then I'll line it up like this. There we go. After that, I'll shrink the brush size a little bit, and then I'll do some kind of dart-shaped brush strokes here. They're kind of like leaves, and I'm also allowing Procreate to snap them straight. And this green tone is okay, but I think it's a little bit too bright. So I'm going to adjust it with the hue, saturation, and brightness and try to refine the color a little bit. There we go. Now if you look at the flower, you can see we have a little bit of subtle shading going on that makes it more three-dimensional. The stem doesn't have that, so that's why it looks flat. So I'm going to show you an easy way to add that effect. So I'm going to make sure the stem layer is selected. Then I can grab the selection tool set to freehand, and I'm just going to make a selection that just goes right down the center of the stem. I'll follow it back up, reconnect it. I'll feather it out a tiny bit, just like 5 or 6%. Hue, saturation, and brightness, and I can just brighten that portion. Now, usually when you brighten it, it also gets a little bit more saturated with the color, so I'll desaturate it as well. Next, I want to work on this transition here. So I'm going to make sure the Heliconia flower is selected. Then I'm going to switch to the water blender and just use that at a small size to kind of fade this in. Now another thing you can do to make this look more three-dimensional is add some shadows on the stem. So I think it makes sense that the flower here is casting a shadow. So I'll make sure the stem layer here is selected. Then I'll grab my selection tool, set to freehand, And I'll just select those areas where I want there to be a shadow. There we go. Then I can go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and I can just slightly darken those areas. It's kind of an optional touch, but I think it really makes the flower pop. And just like that, this heliconia is finished. If you like the repeating method I used to build this flower, I think you might also like the hydrangea tutorial, and you can click here to watch that one next.